Hi, my name is Danny Sherhammer, and the strategy that I chose is summative. It is the project-based assessment. So having a project-based assessment means that the project-based learning was involved. Project-based learning is an instructional method where the teacher allows the students to learn new knowledge and skills by applying their current knowledge and skills to a complex question, a challenge, or a problem. Problem-based learning is a style of active learning and inquiry-based learning because students are actively researching or asking questions or physically working on making a project, and that's basically what inquiry-based learning is as well. It's a great way to develop collaboration, critical thinking, and communication skills among students. So a little bit of history is John Dewey, who was an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer, initially promoted the idea of learning by doing. With John Dewey's My Pedagogic Creed from 1987, he states, "I believe that the active side precedes the passive in the development of the child nature. That expression comes before conscious impression, that the muscular development precedes the sensory, that movements come before conscious sensations. I believe that consciousness is essentially motor or impulsive, that conscious states tend to project themselves onto action." He also states that I believe the neglect of this principle is the cause of a large part of the waste of time and strength in schoolwork. The child is thrown into a passive, receptive, or absorbing attitude. The conditions are such that he is not permitted to follow the law of his nature. The result is friction and waste. All of this means is that John Dewey believed students learn better through hands-on by physically doing things rather than sitting and listening and watching to a lecture, to the teacher just doing example problems over and over. The theoretical perspective of project-based learning is that it can be closely associated with the constructivist theories of Piaget. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Piaget's theory of constructivism argues that people produce knowledge and form meaning based upon their experiences. In his interpretation of Piaget's constructivism, Ernst von Glaserfeld states that there is no way of transferring knowledge. Every knower has to build it up for him or herself. The cognitive organism is first and foremost an organizer who interprets experience, and by that interpretation shapes it into a structured world. That goes for experiencing what we call sensory objects and events. When it comes to project-based learning, a student typically has to research and build up their own knowledge before tackling the project itself. After researching, the student interprets their research experience and shapes it into a structured final project. When applying project-based learning within a classroom, the teacher should start by thinking of an essential question that relates to the current topic or the overall topic of the unit. This question can come from a real-world topic, or should come from a real-world topic that will pose a problem or situation that the student can tackle. The next step involves designing a plan for the project. So when designing the project, the teacher should think about the standards that will be addressed and the goals that will be achieved. The teacher could be the sole designer of the project, or the teacher could involve students within planning. Involving the students allows the students to feel a sense of ownership for the project and makes them more actively involved in the decision-making. The next step for designing a project is creating a schedule, essentially a timeline for when components of the project should be due, and it should be set before the project begins. In order to enable the success of the students, the teacher should find ways to help the students properly manage their time and remind them of due dates and possibly benchmarks, so having parts of the project due in shorter periods of time so that at the end they can just turn in their entire project. And the teacher should mostly be there to provide resources and guidance to those students as well. And finally, when assessing the finished project, the teacher is able to evaluate the student's progress and relate that progress to others, as well as providing feedback to the students on how well they understand the information and what they can improve on. So one example of project-based learning would be a science fair project. Having students come up with their own essential question from a real-world problem that allows for a student to be creative and can really motivate them into doing research on a topic that interests them. There's a lot of flexibility with having students create a science fair project, such as flexibility on topics, groups, and the finalized project itself. Another example would be having a book report. Now, some English teachers only ask for written papers when they ask for book reports, but other teachers allow for flexibility, meaning they'll allow students options on how they want to complete their book report. For example, they could write a paper still, or they could create a poster or a PowerPoint presentation, or even an interpretive dance. So in scoring projects, teachers usually utilize rubrics. The rubric divides the project into parts and usually has a point scale with clear descriptions on how a student receives a certain amount of points for each part. Sometimes if the project has students in groups, teachers will allow students to evaluate their own peers in the group. And in this scenario, teacher provides a rubric and allows students to grade each other based on how well their group members are doing in the roles that they've decided.